is always sacrificial. If you love someone, you're willing to sacrifice for them. How did God show his love for you? For God so loved the world that he gave his only son. He sacrificed. It always is. So that's how I see Sarah at this point, her willingness to sacrifice herself for the benefit of her husband. She was showing him, has said, steadfast, loyal love. I know we judge her pretty harshly. It's like, why would it be okay? And we judge him, but it's a whole different world. And it's an example for us that, you know, in our culture, we fight for our own rights hard, don't we? I have the right. And yet, in Christ's kingdom, what does he ask us to do? To always give up our own rights for him. Okay. So they, now at this point, is Abraham showing faith? So even though Abraham's this man of faith, right? What do we know? What do we know about Abraham? A man of faith. That we see faith and unfaith, or belief and unbelief mixed at the same time, doesn't it? We see trust and not trusting, then trusting myself. I've got an idea. So we'll keep going. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful, and the princes of Pharaoh saw her, and they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house, and for her sake, he, Pharaoh, dealt well with Abram. This is exactly what he said, for they'll deal well with me because of you. So she was being his helper and helping him at this point. And so he had sheep and oxen and male donkeys and male servants and female servants, and female donkeys and camels. So he acquired much more wealth on what, personally I would consider an ill-conceived idea to go down to Egypt and run, not listen to what God was saying, but to do his own thing. But God still immensely blessed him through this. Is it because he did what God wanted him to? Or is it because God blesses who he chooses to bless? Yeah. Do we deserve the blessing that God gives us? Or are we blessed in spite of it? Okay. Yeah. Genesis 12:17 says, "But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house and great plagues because of Sarai." So God is protecting Sarai at this point. And so, and Pharaoh then Pharaoh gave his men orders concerning him, and they sent him away and all that he had. So Abram went up from Egypt. I skipped out a whole lot of stuff because I don't have enough time to go through everything. But God took care of it. Even though Abram didn't show a lot of faith, God still takes care because he chose Abram. Did Abram choose God? He obeyed him, but God found Abram, right? How many of you have seen the movie His Only Son that came out a while ago? Okay, not very many of you. I highly recommend it. For those, it's it'll be on a streaming like Prime. His Only Son. They did the story of Abram sacrificing Isaac, and they portray Sarah exceedingly well. They helped me to understand her a little bit better through that movie. I'm not always great at recommending depictions because usually they miss a lot of the really good stuff. This one did a great job. Okay. So Abram leaves Egypt, and then you have chapter 13, chapter 14, and chapter 15, which Sarah's not mentioned in. What happens is a lot with Lot, and this is where we got the story of Lot parting ways with Abram, and then Abram has to go rescue Lot from being captured, and then he gives sacrifice. He brings an offering to Melchizedek and is blessed by Melchizedek, which becomes a whole nother thing. And in chapter 15 is when God renews his covenant with Abram, and he tells Abram, it's going to be your own seed that your own son will be your heir, because he's thinking that he's going to have to just leave all his stuff to his servant. And he says, nope, it's going to come. And so Abram's getting older, right? Chapter 16. We're going to talk about Sarah's dilemma and Hagar's story. They're the same thing. Because I'm figuring that Abram has shared everything with Sarah. I believe Abram loves his wife dearly. What was common at that time, if a man and a husband and a wife had no kids, he would take a second wife to have children by. You still see this in other cultures where if you don't have it. So Abram never did that on his own. He was content. He loved Sarah. He wasn't going to bring somebody else in to compete with her. I do believe that. It's not in the Bible as such, but you can have a discussion with me later if you feel differently. But what happens now in verse 1, Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. Barrenness is a shame. Okay? Even today, to want children and not be able to have children, there is a huge amount of shame that goes along with that feeling. And it was even worse then, because today we work really hard at saying it's okay, you can do different things, we can adopt, we can have other ways. But not then, or so we say. But she had a female, verse 1 says she had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And now we're introduced to Hagar. She is Sarah's female Egyptian servant. So she came from out of Egypt, and she is serving Sarah. She's her best girl for serving and helping her. Sarah was like a princess, and that was my princess is the name of Sarai. Abram was a wealthy man, and he had a large retinue, so he kind of ruled a tribe of his own, just not his own seed. And Sarah was in charge of everything else in that sense of way. So she was, in a sense, kind of a queen in her own right, without the name, for how she, her position within their community. And so she comes to Abram, and again, she's sacrificing herself. And she says, behold, now Yahweh, the Lord, has prevented me from bearing children. So she sees it's something God has done to her, that he's preventing me from having it. So go to my servant, I will give her to you, so I may obtain children by her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So Sarah decides that she needs to find a solution. She needs to be a helper, right? She's going to help her husband. She's not doing it by having a child, so she'll sacrifice and let her maid sleep with him so that by her. What do we call this? Does this happen today? What was that? Surrogacy. This is a big deal, isn't it? Surrogacy, we do this. And in our culture today, surrogacy is open up. And surrogacy takes out from God's hands and puts it back into man's hands, doesn't it? Yeah, okay. That'll be another discussion someday to talk about the fallout from surrogacy and how that has affected so much in our culture today, not necessarily in a good way. Okay, so verse 3. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, so now he's 85, Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar, the Egyptian, her slave woman, and gave her to her husband Abram as his wife. Then he had relations with Hagar, and she conceived. And Hagar saw that she had conceived, and her mistress became insignificant in her sight. You heard me pause on saw and sight. This needs to echo back to Eve in the garden. When Eve saw that the tree was good for food and to look at and to make one wise. Throughout the Bible itself, pause when you see this. I've come over it several times already as we've read through this, what we see and generally we're making moral decisions when we see something. And it goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 1, when God created and then he saw what he had made and he declared that it was good. So there's the idea that what God sees and declares good versus what we see, what man sees, and tries then to declare as good or not good. And so my question, has this ever happened to you? You had a solution, there was a problem. You figured out a solution, you implemented it, and then it all goes wrong. Yeah, okay. Yeah. This is all of us, right? Yeah. What might have been a better way? Yeah. The thing we don't want to do, right? Waiting on God and God's timing, even when you see it running out, right? When you think there is no time left. Okay. So what happens with Sarah when her slave girl starts to get uppity with her and act like, I'm better than you now, I got pregnant, neener, right? Sarah, who does Sarah blame? Abram, okay, may the wrong done to me be on you. Yeah, I gave my servant, I sacrificed for you to your embrace. And when she saw that she conceived, she looked on me with contempt. Now may the Lord judge between you and me. And this judging has made the Lord see this and make the right moral, what is good and what isn't good, okay? So we want to see through God's eyes, not our own eyes, right? Oh, she's blaming Sarah. No, I would never do that. Only probably just yesterday, I'm sure. Like if I have a great idea, I tell my husband he doesn't, it doesn't work out. I thought, well, you should have seen that. That was your job, right? Yeah. You should have known that it wasn't going to work out because I'm just me, right? Oh, but what is Abram's response? Abram says, Sarai, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please. It's like, this wasn't my idea. You just deal with the way you think is best, right? And so what does she do? She deals harshly. So it sounds like maybe she beat her. I don't know what would have been the right or wrong thing for her at that point to do. And Hagar's response to the harsh treatment, to run away. Oh, good for Hagar, right? You shouldn't have to put up with that kind of abuse. It wasn't your idea in the first place. You're just the slave girl. You didn't have any say in it, right? So she runs away. But what happens when she runs away? Genesis 16, verse 17 says, the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water. Do you realize this is the first place that we are introduced to the angel of the Lord? Do y'all know who this angel of the Lord is? This is Jesus. When he visits, he is this. This is a pre-incarnate Jesus visiting Hagar. Can you imagine? Who was Hagar? Just some Egyptian slave girl. She didn't know Yahweh. She wasn't a part of it. But he sought her and found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? Isn't this just like God? He always asks a question, doesn't he? Yeah, because he wants relationship. He wants to interact. He doesn't just go around saying, do. He comes to us asking. And she answers that I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai. And so the angel of the Lord said, return to your mistress and submit to her. The angel of the Lord also said to her, I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. What? He's going to bless Hagar? Well, here we're thinking, well, this is what this is the one he's promised, right? For Abram. It still sounds very much like this. But he says, behold, you're pregnant. You're going to bear a son. You're going to call his name Ishmael. You know what Ishmael means? God hears. Okay? Because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He'll be a wild donkey of a man. His hand is against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him, and he'll dwell over against all his kinsmen. We're going to see this definitely has come true. So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are a God of seeing." Okay. For she said, "Truly, here I have seen him who looks after me." And therefore the well was called Bir Lahai Roi, and it lies between Kadesh and Bered. It's translated, "the well of the living one who sees me." And so Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. So she must have told Abram what went on. That's why we have it. Now, how old is Abram? He's 86 years old. So basically, this is that year that all this happened in. It's 11 years since they left Haran. Now, did you notice that God pursued Hagar? That she didn't go in the wilderness looking for him? I love this about our God. He's pursuing us even when we don't know it, even when we're running away. Now, this is the last we hear of Hagar until 14 years later. But now we're going to talk back to Sarai. Sarai becomes Sarah. In chapter 17, God renews his promise covenant with Abram, and he reveals Sarah's role. Now, when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am God Almighty, El Shaddai." Don't we love that? "Walk before me and be blameless, that I may make a covenant between me and you, and may multiply you greatly." Okay. He's got Ishmael, so that's probably, that's still the thing that he's working on. And then in verse 10, and he's between verse 2 and verse 10, he changes Abram's name from Abram to Abraham, from exalted father to the father of a multitude or many. In verse 10, he gives the covenant. He says, "This is my covenant which you shall keep between me, you, and your offspring after you. Every male among you will be circumcised." So now he's given him the sign of the covenant. Abram's 99 before he gets circumcised. Okay. Yeah. Think about that. And then in verse 15, God says to Abram, "As for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name." So the name change for Sarah is just a minor, small change, and it's from my princess to princess in the broad sense, okay, which it demonstrates God's intention to incorporate Sarah into his covenant purpose, showcasing divine involvement in the unfolding redemptive story. Changing the name signifies a change in the relationship. And here's another little rabbit trail. Revelation talks about a new name and a name being written. Okay, it follows its way through. There's all kinds of stuff that start here. So names, God has a name for you. Okay. But then he says, "I will bless her," God does. "And moreover, I will give you a son by her," by Sarah. "I will bless her, and she shall become nations. Kings of people shall come from her." Then Abraham fell on his face. Do you know what that means? That's the position of worship. And you fall on your face, it's worship. And then he laughs as he worships and says, "Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who's 90 years old, bear a child?" And Abram said to God, "Oh, that Ishmael," see, he's still like, "might live before you." Because he still has this hope. He's got Ishmael, and he's got a promise of all these nations coming from Ishmael, right? And God says, "No, Sarah, it is Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac." So what does Isaac mean? Laughter. And he says that after Abraham's laugh. But then we're going to have Sarah's laugh too later on. Okay. He says, I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. As for Ishmael, I've heard you, and behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and multiply him greatly. He shall father 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation. But I establish my covenant with Isaac, and whom Sarah shall bear to you. I love this because Sarah and Abram were in that covenant relationship of marriage. And so when God makes a covenant with Abram, he's making it with his wife who is in covenant relationship. God doesn't do for one spouse what he doesn't do for the other. His blessings are further. And so now they're all circumcised. Next thing you get Abram, and Isaac is circumcised at 13. Abram's growing, right? And then the next chapter 18, here we go. The Lord appears. This is again the pre-incarnate in chapter 18. By the oaks of Mamre, which we saw earlier. And as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day, he lifted up his eyes, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. So the Lord appeared with 2 angels, and again, I'm going to say this is Jesus, a pre-incarnate Jesus. God is spirit. We never see him, but Jesus became man so we could. So anytime you see a physical representation, it's going to be Jesus. And in verse 9, this is where they go through and he's feeding them, okay? They ask, where's your wife, Sarah? Okay, they've got the food, they've did a meal, and now they're saying, where's your wife? And he said, well, she's in the tent. And the Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year. And Sarah, your wife, will have a son. The time is growing short. And Sarah was listening. She'd been preparing the meal. She's close by, and she's kind of listening to what's going on, right? At the tent door behind him. And Sarah and Abram were old, advanced in years, and the way of women had ceased. She was post-menopause, girls. There is no way on God's green earth that she was going to have a kid. That's what Sarah knew, right? So Sarah laughed to herself. She's like, yeah, really. This reminds me very much of the impossibility of Mary being pregnant without knowing a man. Same thing, it echoes through. This is pointing to all of that. Barrenness, God uses barrenness to point to himself, that he does the impossible. So this is what he says. After I'm worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? And the Lord said to Abram, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? Do we undersell him, don't we? Well, it's not going to happen now. And at the appointed time, I will return to you, and about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah, being caught, did what we all do, tried to cover it up and denied it, and said, wait, no, I didn't really laugh. I mean, I am exceedingly guilty of being the girl who laughs inappropriately. Okay? Sometimes the things that I shouldn't find funny, I end up finding funny. So I relate to her right here. And yet, what do we know about Sarah? By faith, Sarah conceived. So it wasn't that she wasn't a woman of faith. Not perfect belief, but she believed. And God still's going to do what he does. Okay? And then chapter 19, we skip because that was Sodom and Gomorrah. And we get to chapter 20. That happened right away after this, and it's another year later. It's during this time. So chapter 20 is where Abram journeys. I'm on time. Okay. I did my thing because I couldn't. The glare means I can't see the clock, and so yeah. So I'm going to skip through this really fast, but they do the same thing with Abimelech, where now they move and they tell Abimelech that this is my sister, not my wife. He takes her. But there's one big difference here. One big difference that Abimelech is not allowed to ever sleep with her. Before he could touch her, God came to him. Okay? It says, verse 4, it says, Abimelech had not come near her. And he said, Lord, you'll kill a nation even though I haven't touched her. Okay, so he stopped before anything. We don't have that in Egypt. And it seems like it went on for a while, and I don't know. It seems like that wasn't a big deal. What's different? She is going to have a baby within the year. And if Abimelech had slept with her, whose baby would it have been? We don't know. Yeah, so God was protecting his own promise again. That's where he protects it. So Abimelech says, here, take more wealth with you. God blesses Abraham through this ill-conceived idea to lie again, causing problem on the people. But God still blesses him, and they get more stuff out of it. I don't recommend it as a way of getting more stuff, okay? Not recommended. And this is because God chooses who he blesses, because he chooses to bless. Okay? It is amazing. So verse Genesis 21, he visits Sarah, and the Lord did to Sarah, and she has a son, Isaac, names him Laughter. And she says, God has made laughter for me. And this is verse 6. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And this is the laughter of joy, not of doubt and derision. So the promise of a son was not only to Abram, but to Sarah as well. Okay, I want you to know that. And so verse 8, the child grew, was weaned, and they had a great feast. So why did they have a great feast when he was weaned? Infant mortality was huge. So weaning meant, gosh, this kid's probably going to make it to adulthood. And so they throw a big party that they've lived this long. But during this, is Isaac makes fun of him. He laughs with mocking. And so now Sarah says, drive out the slave woman. So this time they do send Hagar away with Ishmael. He's in another episode in the desert. You guys will have to read through that because I'm going to get to my last point here. But God again reveals himself to Hagar and doesn't let, do not fear, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. And God was with the boy, and he grew, and he lived in the wilderness and was an archer. So he grows to adulthood. He ends up dying and buried with his fathers. He has a long life, does well. Hagar found a wife from Egypt for him. Why is Ishmael important today? I'm going to tell you, the sons of Ishmael today, or the descendants of Ishmael, or what we have today, we see in Islam. So for those of you who aren't aware, Islam, in their book, they say it was Ishmael that Abraham took up to the mountain and to sacrifice, and he was the chosen. So it's a whole counter to the truth. And so Ishmael being against and being all of this, if you just see this playing out in reality. This history, it's a reliable historical document, very reliable. Okay, so now, Sarah, Genesis 23, she lived 127 years. These were the years of Sarah. So she lived and died at 127. Isaac was not married, did not have kids. She didn't see any grandkids. She died before any of that happened. So I want to go back to Hebrews 11 that said all these, including Sarah, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised because God had provided something better so that apart from us, they would not be made perfect. So even though Sarah had a son, she saw nothing else beyond that. She couldn't see. That was for our benefit. They all died in faith, not really getting the end. Because what is the end of all the promises? What was really the promise being made to Abram? Was this the son Isaac? Was that the end of the promise? Jesus is always the end of it. It was always coming about to Jesus. So chapter 12 of Hebrews tells us that since we have such a great cloud of witnesses, and I'm going to say the witnesses they're testimonies, okay? That's what a witness does. They testify. Since we have such a great cloud of testimonies, Sarah, Abram, all of the Old Testament, surrounding us, lay aside every weight and the sin which entangles us and run with endurance the race set before us. Fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of God. That's the end of all of this, the end of our faith. Sarah looked forward. We see that Abraham looked forward. It was Jesus they were looking forward to. Okay, let me pray. Father, I thank you for the grace of this day. I thank you for giving us part of the story of Sarah. Help us to be faithful in the way that Sarah was, to love you and to trust you in each and every